for being here.
Hello, my name is Finley Spalding, and I'm going to fourth grade at Lowell Elementary. One of my moms is a librarian at Klondike Lane Elementary, and my other mom is trans. I'm worried about JCPS enforcing this law. If JCPS enforces this law, my mom would be forced to use the men's restroom at school events. If JCPS enforces this law, I would not be able to learn about my family at school. I am worried that this law would open the door for students to make fun of my family or my family to not be included. I am also worried about other kids. What if there is a trans kid at my school and we now have to use the wrong pronouns for? What if they have to go into a bathroom that makes them feel uncomfortable and unsafe? I learned in school about the civil rights movement. I think that this law will go the same way as Jim Crow's laws, as a horrible stain to our history. About the civil rights movement, or what if they have to go into a bathroom that makes them feel uncomfortable and unsafe? I learned in school about the civil rights movement. I think that this law will go the same way as Jim Crow's laws, as a horrible stain to our history. I don't want my school to be a part of that problem. By going with version 2, JCPS will be on the right side of history. We will show the state that trans kids and families are welcome at our schools. I trust my parents to take care of me. I think JCPS and the government should do the same.
Thank you, Finley. Our next speaker is Justice Chenault. Justice Chenault. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hi, my name is Justice Chenault. My pronouns are they, them. I will be going into fourth grade at Goldsmith Elementary School. I live in District 3. Today, I would like to talk to you about trans rights, and I think that everyone should have a choice on how to be themselves. And I think I need your help. I want my teachers to respect my pronouns and let me be who I really am. At my school, we have a no bullying rule. SB 150 is bullying by the state. JCPS needs to stand up to the bullies in Frankfort and say that they will not comply with this hateful rule. Therefore, I'm asking you to choose version 2. Version 1 says maybe and version 2 says no.
Thank you, Justice. Our next speaker is Alicia Farrell and then Elliot Hughes. Everyone is speaking tonight on Senate Bill 150. Thank you for being here this evening.
Option 1 is simply too expensive. It's going to cost money when we get sued. It's going to cost us teachers when they quit or get fired or simply cannot come to work anymore. And it's going to cost students lives. You're probably going to hear a lot of statistics tonight, so I'm not even going to bother going into that. The bottom line is this policy will cost students their lives. When I was 13 years old, a good friend of mine, my best friend maybe, trigger warning suicide, took his father's gun and he shot himself in the head. Now, I can't tell you for absolute certain that that kid was trans, that my friend was trans or non-binary, but in the years that have passed and the more I've become a part of the queer community, I've come to suspect that that is in fact the case. But in it doesn't really matter. Well, it matters. But any kind of language that specifically looks at gender behaviors, is going to enforce bullying. As the great kid in front of me said, it is our co-signing violence against any student that looks slightly different than the standard gender presentation that we expect as a society. Now, I also got the good old assault and battery as a kid. growing up in the school system that did not get what I was or who I was. And I can tell you also as an adult that these kids will keep paying. The ones that make it through, the ones that come out on the other side will keep paying. There'll probably be statistics tonight about addiction, about self-harm, and about suicidal ideation throughout the rest of these kids' lives. More addicts are going to come from the abuse and the trauma that these kids suffer. More suicides after they graduate from school. This trauma, these issues, these problems, they don't disappear magically when they're no longer directly under our eyes and our watch as a community, as teachers, and as administrators. They carry that with them. The decision you guys make and the policies that we decide to enact are going to affect them for the rest of their lives. So you're not just going to be responsible for what happens the next 5, 6, 8, 10 years. You're going to be responsible for people living their lives for the next 20, 30, 40, 60 years. One of the things that always breaks my heart so much is we talk about the two Americas, and I think that for some reason, more conservative aspects think that we're not also trying to protect their kids. Statistics don't know red dots or blue dots or red states or blue states. We're fighting for your kids. We're fighting for our kids. We're fighting for ourselves, and we're fighting for you. So no to policy number 1, yes to policy number 2. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Aiden Hoare, and after Aiden, Amy Davis. Aiden Hoare.
All right. Board members, community members, we're here today because it seems JCPS has a problem. But think about that this way. The brilliant poet Hannah Drake asks us, how does it feel to be a problem? How does it feel not just to have a problem, but to be the problem? To know that your very existence, the fact that you are breathing, is problematic. How does it feel to be a problem? How does it feel to know that 1 in 5 trans youth will experience homelessness? How does it feel to know that using a public restroom is a dance between getting jumped or getting arrested? How does it feel to know that 1 in 3 trans youth have tried to kill themselves? How does it feel to wonder, when you finally come out to your parents, will they kick you out? Will they beat you? Or will they love you? How does it feel to be a problem? Now, board members, I don't have any children. I don't have any kids in JCPS. But I do know many, many years ago what it was like to be a queer youth. I do know what it was like to walk through these scary and treacherous hallways as a queer youth. And I can say with absolute certainty that the only reason I am still standing here today is because of safe spaces and safe people. The only reason I am standing here today is because when it became my turn to finally come out to my parents, they chose to love me. The only reason I am standing here today is because when it became my turn to have those thoughts of putting the barrel of a gun to my head, I went to my school counselor and she chose to love me. The only reason I am still standing here today is because of safe spaces and safe people. So as we find ourselves here in this moment in time, drowning in climate catastrophes, an opioid epidemic, a national teacher shortage, and gun violence every single day, how many more speakers need to come up here and talk? How many more studies do you need to read? How many more conversations do you need to have before you finally see that we are not a problem? So why do you keep taking away our safe spaces and our safe people?
Thank you. Our next speaker is Amy Davis. Amy Davis, and after Amy Davis, there will be Chinsia Roberts and then Ezra Sleep. Thank you, Ms. Davis.
Hi, I'm Amy Davis. People who love me use they, them to describe me. I don't have any kids in JCPS, but as a teaching artist, I've had the privilege to work with a lot of students, and these bills really they affect my life as a working artist. If certain books are banned, what's my job going to look like? I think about this kind of thing. The legislation that affects these kids right now, it doesn't just end in the classroom. It we all take that stuff home with us. I think about that a lot. I mean, books can't actually make you gay. Movies can't make you gay because if they could, then everyone who's seen John Carpenter's The Thing would be non-binary like me. No, books and media and being able just to talk about queerness and sexuality don't have to be these emotionally charged and scary things. They can just be neutral. And there are age appropriate ways to talk about gender and sexuality that can actually protect kids and arm them with the knowledge they need to protect themselves. What really just makes me worried is what's going to happen to the people who don't fit into these legislative boxes? What's going to happen to the brave people who don't comply? Where are they going to go? Are they going to go to another like overrun juvenile detention center where they don't have enough staff? Are they not going to have a job? What's going to happen to them? What's going to happen to me? The people who can't help with these problems that you're having are being forced out or feel unsafe to do so. Queer people are not exceptional or they have some kind of gay magic that makes them amazing at solving problems. It's just we're simply here and we care and we want to live so badly. That's all we want. There's nothing dramatic or huge about being non-binary or trans or anything like that. Trans people have always existed. I think a lot of this sensationalism now becomes having like language to speak about it. And we should be speaking about it because it's not scary and it's not weird. So kids won't stop seeking information when you take their resources away. It'll just drive them to places that are more unsafe and it will make them more confused. We have to talk about this stuff. Pretending trans people aren't real won't fix things. So I just asked you to think about your future because it's inside the classrooms in August. Because the kids of right now, you're going to need them in the future. And I really hope they're going to be there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Cecilia Roberts and then Ezra Sleep. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you for having me. So I'm actually quite nervous because I've never done this before, but I came here because I find this to be really important. So first I want to touch on the issue of pronouns. I know that in the bill, there is a provision that says that pronouns need to be, if students don't go by the pronouns of their assigned birth, that they need to be outed to their parents. I find that to be quite ridiculous and unfair to students. I think it is very important that students are able to express themselves in ways that they see fit. When you come to school, you are in a place to learn, you're socializing and playing in those pronouns and playing in your gender expression, whether you want to or not, is part of the school experience. I find that to be extremely important. Gender identity is not always set in stone, and individuals should feel free to express themselves and explore. Parents may not understand that, which is okay, but they should react to their own confusion, not with contempt, but with love and understanding. The confidentiality part of the bill, whenever it comes to parents, the parents need to let go of a little bit of the ego and understand that your children are individuals and they're able to be confused themselves, as should you be confused. Because guess what? None of us have been the parents of whatever age child you are. You know, you may be 60 years old. You've never been a 60-year-old with a 30-year-old kid before, have you? No. So you need to understand that what you know is not what you know. It's the experience that you're able to experience right now. Schools' use of pronouns. I believe that schools should be able to refer to the children and the youth how they want to be referred to. School is a very, very, very safe place for a lot of people, me included. I was not a JCPS student, I was an NAFCS student. But a lot of people at school knew that I was gay before I knew that I was gay. And instead of running around and using rumors with the other students and teachers and everything, and running to parents and the PTO and my coaches and my band director and all that, they nourished me, they took me in, they embraced me, and I felt safe to be myself, safer than I did at home. I didn't come out to my parents until I was, I don't know, 22 years old. My partner is the one who actually encouraged me to do that, and I really appreciated that. But I think that students should feel safe and comfortable expressing themselves in school. And if parents are upset about that, that's fine, but it's not your life, it's your child's life. At the end, my last little point, I'm not saying that school should be the end all be all for sex education or even the primary source, but I think that schools are
for being here this evening. Next speaker is Ezra Sleet and then Natalie Mumford. Ezra Sleet, Natalie Mumford. Natalie Mumford. Thank you for being here.
My name is Natalie Sky Mumford, and my pronouns are she, her, they, them. And my reason for being here today is that I believe enforcing Senate Bill 150 will irrefutably harm the queer youth in these districts. I am a 30-year-old trans woman, and I spent the majority of my 30 years not knowing this about myself. I was raised in a religious environment where anything that wasn't heteronormative was strictly prohibited and inconceivable to my developing mind. As a child, I always had a vague notion that I had feelings about myself that were, to say the least, confusing. I knew I was attracted to other girls my age, but had no idea why I was insanely jealous that I could not be one of them. Had I felt comfortable enough to share these feelings with somebody, I may have realized much earlier in life that I was not satisfied being a boy. However, my reality was that this possibility could not exist. I knew my surroundings well enough to know this idea would be met with resistance and not acceptance. I went the rest of my teenage years to my later 20s having no palpable sense of self-esteem for myself. I eventually found my way and am happily becoming the woman I've always wanted to be. This, however, was not without a lifetime's worth of anxiety, depression, heartache, and fear over this one simple inquiry. Who am I? Last month, while attending my first Pride Festival, the thing that stood out to me the most was how many young teens were in attendance, proudly draped in a variety of different Pride flags representing who they knew they were. I felt a sense of hope that despite the many different ways queer people are being attacked through legislation, we are still resilient and visible, and our youth reflect this. Unfortunately, the majority of people who run this country deem it the utmost importance to attempt to suppress these identities in the name of our so-called freedom. And while this is laughable, this is anything but funny. It's terrifying. If you attempt to silence conversations about sexual and gender identities, lessons about sexual health and wellness, the usage of names and pronouns for students and staff alike, you will be creating an environment of hostility, apathy, violence, and discrimination to young people at their most vulnerable. You will be creating a generation baptized in ignorance and delusion who will assume that anything going against the standard quo is something to fear rather than to be celebrated. Queer youth will continue to be ostracized and die by their own hands or by the hands of others for a lack of acceptance. Enforcing Senate Bill 150 will not silence any of us, but it will expose where the rest of you are who are fighting to have it instated. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Sonia Wild DeVries. Sonia.
Hello, good evening. My name is Sonia Wild DeVries. I'm an educator at Western High School. Also just want to acknowledge all the brave folks in the audience and Senator Berg, who is, I think, just outside, who lost her son because of this issue. Across this country, we're seeing a transphobic and homophobic agenda, a white supremacist agenda, and an agenda that would have us believe that enslavement benefited the enslaved, and that instead of demanding more resources for our schools and communities, instead of getting guns out of our communities, we need more police in the schools. And it is up to us to turn this around. I grew up with family that not only survived, but resisted the Nazis, and I cannot help but see the parallels. After the Nuremberg trials, it was recognized that ordinary people have a responsibility to defy oppressive laws, because throughout history, injustice and oppression have been codified into law. Slavery was once legal. Jim Crow was legal. Many of Hitler's laws against Jewish and Romani people were legal, because people in power make sure that the laws protect them. I want to tell you a story about my uncle and his brother, Herbert and Hans, German Jews who fled to the Netherlands before it was occupied by the Nazis, and then lived through the occupation there, at first trying to go along with the rules and regulations. And one day they were sailing on the canal, and a Nazi patrol pulled them over and told them it was no longer legal for Jews to sail on the canal, and that they needed to report to Nazi headquarters. My uncle's brother said, "Let's do what they say and we'll be safe." My uncle, however, was a little more politically savvy and insisted that what they needed to do was go underground. So they survived by hiding among farmers in the South. Their parents and 10-year-old sister did not survive because they believed that going along with the Nazi occupier laws would save them. Instead, they were sent to Auschwitz. The truth is that historically, not resisting has never led to anything but more oppression. When we show the people in power that we're not going to resist, what happens is they push more of their agenda. And where does it end? I'm encouraging the JCPS school board to end it here and to refuse to comply with a law that would oppress and dehumanize our trans and queer youth, and frankly, damage all of us. Please vote against SB 150 and let our youth know we stand with them always. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Our next speaker is Anise Chenault, and then after Anise, John Curl. Thank you for being here.
My name is Anise Chenault. I'm a parent of a non-binary child at Goldsmith Elementary School in JCPS, Justice. I am in District 3. We moved to Louisville in 2016 when Justice was 2 years old. We value public schools and wanted to educate our kid in them. Both Justice's dad and I are products of public schools. We discussed and debated whether living in Jefferson County or Oldham County would be a better place for them as a mixed race child. We very intentionally picked JCPS for the diversity that it holds and the diversity that we know JCPS values. We didn't know Justice would go on to identify as non-binary. They told me that their pronouns had changed from he, they to they, them on March 16th. I don't know if that date has any significance to you, but I won't forget it. It's the same day that SB 150 passed. Imagine you were me for 1 minute. Your most important job is to keep your kids safe. Yesterday, you knew that you could send your kid to school with the protection of the law behind them. You hoped and prayed that nothing would hurt them, but you know how the world is. And now tomorrow, you have to keep sending your kid to school, but with no law to back you up. And no law to back up teachers that want to do the right thing to help your child. Not only no law to protect you, but the fact is that the law is now set up to disrespect and harm your kid. So I trepidatiously sent a text. Dear Justice's teacher, last night Justice asked us to start using they, them pronouns for them. They asked if we'd let you know. Please honor Justice's self-knowledge and the trust that they have put in us to share this with us. She responded with a thumbs up. Will Justice's teacher next year be able to do the same? Please. The only protection I could offer was a please. Please honor and protect my kid when I'm not there. Please ensure that they can learn in a safe environment. Can you imagine sending your kid to school with only the power of a please? So now I say please to you. Please stand up as the most progressive school district in the state of Kentucky. We know there will be legal battles no matter what you do. Use this opportunity to tell Frankfort what we all know, that SB 150 is hateful and violent and harmful to our kids, all of our kids, queer and straight. Please stand on the right side of history. Use this moment to be prophetic. Pass version 2. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Our next speaker is John Curl. John Curl. He's not here. Okay, thank you. Our next speaker then is Alexander Griggs. Alexander Griggs.
Excuse me. Okay. I've heard a lot of people come up here and say a lot of negative things, and that didn't sit right in my spirit because the whole time I couldn't help thinking that gender expansive people, myself included, are more than just trauma. I want to start by saying as a person who holds multiple marginalized intersectionalities, and that is a product of JCPS, that one marginalized intersectionality is not more important than the other. And in the same way that you would go to bat for Black kids, or in the same way that you would go to bat for kids to have religious freedoms and all of the other things that JCPS stands for, you need to go to bat in the same way for gender expansive kids. This is obviously a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I didn't feel safe to come out until I was an adult. It would be nice if we didn't need to even go through this, because I really don't even understand why this is a bipartisan issue. This is about autonomy and people being able to choose what they do and don't do with their bodies. And Title IX includes the language gender identity in it. So until that changes, at the end of the day, that's what we need to follow. And if that changes, you can bet that I'm going to be marching and fighting for it to change back, because it's not okay. This law is wrong, period. And JCPS will be on one side of the other of history. Just like with all of the other wrong laws that you've heard today, I don't have to mention them because they've already been mentioned, right? But I just want you to stop and think that, because we're not going to stop fighting. That's not going to happen. That when we do win, what would they be able to say about JCPS? When we do win, what will, I'm sorry. When we do win, I'm trying to visualize that in my mind and hold that, and that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm sorry that I'm pausing, but when I say what will they say about
our next speaker is Deanna Rushing, and then Greg Tishner. Deanna Rushing.
Hey everybody, I go by Stretch for obvious reasons.
and my phone died, so my speech is ad hoc. But while we were waiting to speak to my representative before the meeting, I looked at the wall, the hall, whatever you want to call it, of fame outside. And I can't help but think that you have their pictures on the wall because you're proud that they were your students. And in some way, they were able to be nurtured by our education system. I'm proud to be a supporter of our education system, our public education system. And I want to say that all of the kids that walk through your door have every right to dream to be on that wall in some form or fashion in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Greg Tishner, and then Catherine Husley. Greg Tishner first, please. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. As a teacher that works in a building where a lot of our students come to us already feeling ostracized, the last thing my students need is another reason to other their classmates. One thing I see that many of my students do over the years of 16 years, especially those with low self-esteem, is that they will attempt to make themselves feel better by making someone else feel less around them. I have to tell them that it does not work that way. Dehumanizing the LGBTQIA community, which is what SB 150 seems to be asking JCPS to do, is not the path forward to the future we all deserve. My students and I grow best together when we collaborate with each other's differences and learn how to draw upon each other's strength through collaboration. Diversity is not a weakness. Instead, it is one of JCPS's greatest strengths. But it is not only the LGBTQIA students and families that will be impacted. As James Baldwin once said, people who shut their eyes to reality simply invite their own destruction. When there is an intentional exclusion and dehumanizing for one or more, there is a collective trauma experienced by all. Adding more trauma to our already over-traumatized Louisville community is the last thing we all need. It is in no way, shape, or form the healing we need to move forward together. I am relatively new to the middle school level in the last 4 years, and frankly, I've been discouraged by the fact that we don't have enough resources being mainstreamed that would make my LGBTQ plus students feel more accepted. I'd like to see a comprehensive middle school sex education program that includes non-binary perspectives. I'd like to see professional development opportunities for teachers like me that know a little, but have much room to improve further with regard to creating an inclusive classroom environment. Gay-straight alliances in each middle and high school would go a long way to building a positive culture in our buildings. Providing mental health supports for our most vulnerable and traumatized student populations needs to be continued and supported. JCPS board, we have a moral imperative to resist the othering that SB 150 represents. Please vote yes to version 2. We know our vision as outlined by Vision 2020 and other guiding documents. Let's stand by our values of diversity, equity, and respect.
Our next speaker is Catherine Husley. Catherine. And then after Catherine is Erica Harrod. Thank you for being here.
Hi, so my name is Katie Punsley. I'm a JCPS teacher, and I'm also a member of the NEA Individuals with Disabilities Act cadre. And so recently, as part of that work, we are updating the 2020 guide on advocating for LGBTQ students with disabilities. And so this is a great guide on best practices for working with queer and disabled students, and it's done in conjunction with different organizations, including the National Association of School Psychologists and the Human Rights Campaign. But updating this guide for 2023 was really disheartening because of all the laws that have been passed over the last 3 years. Over 120 anti-trans pieces of legislation have been passed in this country. And every time one of these discriminatory pieces of legislation gets passed, it impedes the doing what is right for students, right? And so one of the things that we know is right is bathroom safety for our trans disabled students. And it talks about how 65% of students who can't use the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity will avoid using the bathroom altogether. Yeah, so yeah, as a teacher, it's like how are those students even going to focus in class if they're not using the bathroom? You know, bladder and kidney infections aside, and all of the health risks, right? We have 25% of students who are reporting that they go to great lengths to avoid changing clothes or showering at school. They'll skip PE classes. One student quoted said, "I wait until I go home to use the bathroom, even when I'm at school for over 10 hours. I wear gym clothes over my normal clothes to avoid changing in the locker room," right? When queer students don't have access to facility options, these are the kinds of conditions they're subjected to. And they're susceptible to developing, you know, just awful physical and mental health conditions. So when this was published 3 years ago, the guidance was to put in IEPs and 504 plans to give access to students to the facilities that they need. But if we don't adopt version 2, we can't do that, right? And so it's really important that we make sure that we have a version of a policy that protects students. If we're timid in our support of protecting students, we're not doing our job, right? They're getting messages from a vocal minority that they do not deserve to exist in this world. And we have to be unequivocal in telling them that that's just not true. We love and support our trans students just like every other student who walks through the door in JCPS.
Thank you. Next speaker is Erica Harrod and then Amara Bryant.
Good evening, everyone. I'm deathly afraid of speaking in public. I'm not a speechwriter, but it is the matter of life and death that has brought me here. It is the life and death of our transgender teenagers that I am here to talk about. I have a transgender teen who's in the 8th grade. They had to help a fellow classmate who tried to commit suicide to get the resources and the health care that they needed. Thankfully, that teen is doing better, but a 13-year-old shouldn't be the source and the lifeline for a fellow trans teenager. These children should not have to feel like they don't belong, and it's not okay to be who they are. There are people in the world who have said things about transgender people that are absolutely devastating. Things like, we need to eradicate transgenderism, and God doesn't make mistakes. But a little side note here, God didn't make a mistake when he made my child. My child is perfect the way they are, and they are exactly the way that God wanted them to be. And I'm so proud of them. But imagine being a teenager and hearing these things about your identity. It's obvious why transgender teenagers are struggling. School should be a safe place for these kids. This hurtful rhetoric should not be echoed in our schools. It is the school's job to protect our students and give them the best environment for learning. I asked my great kid here if they were intentionally misgendered, how would that affect their learning? They said that it would be a hurtful distraction. It would make them not trust that teacher and be less likely to speak up and engage in the classroom. They have also spoke of increased depression and thoughts of feeling like the world would be better without them. This breaks my heart so much. Schools shouldn't contribute to this hate-filled world. Schools should be a refuge for all kids especially the hurting minority. We all know that a hateful distraction, not trusting a teacher, not wanting to participate in the classroom, increased depression, and thoughts of suicide would impact the student's ability to learn. In fact, this week, a superintendent in a large school district in Virginia took the heroic step of declining to implement rules that would force students to use bathrooms, pronouns, names, and that don't align with their sex assigned at birth, or that align with their sex assigned at birth. He did so in accordance with Title IX and because he knew it was the right thing for his students in his district. I ask and beg you, as a mom of 4 JCPS students, to protect all 4 of my kids.
Our next speaker is Amira Bryant and then Shamika Parrish Wright. Amira Bryant.
Y'all look a little bored up here. And I need y'all to wake up a little bit because people are up here pouring their souls out to you about their children. So yeah, my name is Amira Bryant, she, her pronouns. I come to you as a queer Black community member and a representative of Dove delegates, excuse me. Trans youth deserve love, safety, and validation as all students do. The JCPS school board can and needs to support our trans youth by voting no on SB 150. The following identified reasons justify our demand of death to this law. SB 150 limits opportunities for needed education on our progressing community. It contradicts Title IX and civil rights laws. It ignores the high risk of probable and guaranteed suicide cases. It criminalizes our youth, which is identical to your weapons detection system and your insistence behind more police presence in schools. And it removes the right to a dignified and satisfied life, as children very much understand the difference of an otherwise dignified life, as they too experience depression, along with other mental health challenges developed through trauma and lack of support. We need to listen and we need to collaborate with our youth, and more importantly, our trans youth, as they are the experts in their experiences and in the areas of queer equitable rights, needs, and resources. Just to touch on the surveillance point, studies and everyday community realities show that increased investments in surveillance and all the fancy gear you need to accomplish this disproportionately affects our marginalized students. For example, trans students, students of color, immigrant students, disabled students, etc. Y'all know. This dangerously aligns them with the school to prison pipeline, when the better options are to invest in support and engagement and the will to see the students thrive no matter their backgrounds and their current realities. Version number 2 of this law provides ideal morals and implications as a better start to coming to a collaborative middle in deciding what is best for our youth. Forcing parents and students to comply with SB 150 is legally ridiculous, as you're supporting default politics into household conversations where you don't belong. As a community member, I stand by my fellow teachers, parents, students, y'all turn my mic now, and trans youth, and we will not comply with this hateful law unless you want blood on your hands. We call the school board to vote no to SB 150 and vote yes to version number 2. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Shamika Parrish Wright and then Serenity Johnson. Shamika. Serenity Johnson.
Hello, my name is Serenity Johnson. I am transgender. This year has been an especially tough one for LGBTQ people across the country, not just here in Kentucky. The LGBTQ community is under an unprecedented legislative attack. The systems, and in some cases the people that we thought would protect us, have failed to do so, or have offered little more than words and sympathy. LGBTQ kids, especially trans kids, have borne the brunt of these attacks. Right now, there are trans kids out there who feel like they have fewer people than ever before that they can trust. We like to talk about the basics of education, reading, writing, arithmetic, and so forth. But if kids don't even feel like they're safe at school, they're not going to learn any of these things. And their peers are going to learn the mistaken lesson that it's okay to treat other people with disrespect. Teachers here in the JCPS system that I've talked to have said that already not enough is being done to combat the harassment and bullying of LGBTQ students and staff. They tell me about how much it means to their students that their correct names and pronouns are used, about how concerned their students are for their safety when they come out to them in private, about the fear that the pride flags that their students say make them feel so welcome and included will have to be taken down. Because of SB 150, they say that their administrators are unsure how to respond, or worse, accuse them of seeking attention. This is not okay. JCPS must be clear in its guidance. Version 2 of the policy we are here to discuss today on the agenda tonight acknowledges that SB 150 almost certainly violates Title IX and the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Version 2 ensures that existing protections for LGBTQ youth remain in place, protections that JCPS has devoted a great deal of funding and working hours to develop over these past years. I understand that some people are worried that this will result in a lawsuit against the school district. But the fact of the matter is, JCPS is very likely going to end up on the end of a lawsuit either way. And if the district is going to get sued, they might as well get sued for doing the right thing. Trans kids risk everything, every day, just by existing in this world. The least we as adults can do is stand with them. I ask that JCPS adopt policy version 2. Thank you.
Thank you. That completes 45 minutes of speakers. We have 6 speakers that will finish up, but that completes our first 45 minutes for speakers. So thank you for those that have been able to speak to us this evening. Those that are left, please do not leave. We will move our meeting along as quickly as we possibly can. It is a policy that we are limited to 45 minutes now and 45 minutes at the end of the meeting. Thank you for being here this evening, and we will move on with our agenda at this time. The next item on our agenda is an action item, recommendation to receive a report regarding board policies to implement Senate Bill 150 to adopt related board policies for first reading and to receive for review related administration procedures. Dr. Polio.
Thank you, Chair Porter and board members. Tonight we have Jonathan Lowe, who is bringing 2 versions of board policies for your consideration. Both of these policies were discussed and presented at the policy committee earlier in July. I'll turn it over to Jonathan at this time to cover the comparisons of the 2 versions.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Lowe. I'm the Executive Administrator for Policy and Systems for JCPS. I want to start today by talking about just a few of the key provisions that Senate Bill 150 has.
Jonathan, excuse me, can you pull the microphone up
Sure.
so everybody will be able to hear you, please?
Is that better? Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry
Thank
about that. So there are 5 key provisions of Senate Bill 150 that we're going to talk about today. The first is a requirement of the school district to do one of 2 things. A district can eliminate instruction on human sexuality and STDs in grades 1 through 5, or it can choose to prohibit instruction with the goal or purpose of studying sexual orientation or gender identity. As it happens, both versions 1 and 2 choose the latter, so that we would prohibit instruction in human sexuality in grades 1 through 5, but no change would be made to instruction or curriculum relating to sexual orientation or gender identity. The second thing that Senate Bill 150 does would prohibit a student from using the restroom that is reserved for students of a different biological sex. It does include a stipulation, however, that with the written consent of a parent or guardian, a school is required to provide the best available restroom accommodation for a transgender student. That could include something like access to a single stall restroom or faculty restroom. The fourth thing that it does is it requires a series of parental notifications and consents regarding things that happen in schools. Parental notification and consent for the provision or referral of health or mental health services relating to human sexuality. Parental notification and consent regarding curriculum and instruction relating to human sexuality. And parental notification and consent regarding the student completion of a well-being survey or health screening for research purposes. Senate Bill 150 also requires that the district have procedures for employees to encourage and facilitate discussion between a student and a parent guardian regarding physical and mental health. And both versions 1 and 2 being presented or discussed tonight do that. So I want to talk about the key differences between versions 1 and 2 at a very high level. First, version 1 expresses the deep concern of the board regarding the negative consequences of Senate Bill 150 and lays out where those concerns lie. It does work hard to do two things. One is to ensure that the district is complying with the statutory requirements of Senate Bill 150, and at the same time, provide as much protection as possible for transgender students within the requirements of the legislation. So that was a very intentional set work of how we drafted version 1. Version 2 argues that Senate Bill 150 violates the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Title IX protections against discrimination. It should be noted, however, that that's not based on settled law. That's based on what's called the persuasive authority of numerous federal court rulings not binding to Kentucky. So across the nation, there have been a number of court rulings that suggest that the provisions of Senate Bill 150 could violate the Constitution or Title IX, and in those instances did. The other important thing to note is the recommendation of the superintendent and legal counsel is for version 1, and version 2 is not recommended for the superintendent and legal counsel. So it's been presented at the request of a board member. It was discussed in committee. The committee did not come to consensus on version 1 or version 2, and so it's brought together for your consideration. Finally, I want to talk about kind of a side-by-side comparison of the key components that are kind of in discussion here. So the truth is, like, 3/4 or 80% of versions 1 and versions 2 are the same. So we're not going to discuss those here tonight, but there are several distinct differences that are important. So version 1, which is the recommended version from superintendent and legal counsel, is that includes a statement of concern regarding the negative consequences of Senate Bill 150. Version 2 is stronger with the expression of a belief that Senate Bill 150 violates the United States Constitution and Title IX. Version 1 suggests that misgendering students repeatedly in an ongoing fashion may constitute a violation of the East BSB Code of Ethics and may constitute sexual harassment under Title IX. Version 2 states that misgendering students does indeed violate the Code of Ethics and constitutes sexual harassment under Title IX. And finally, version 1 would maintain kind of the language from Senate Bill 150 requiring the use of bathrooms based on biological sex as reported by a parent, student, or guardian, except that accommodations may be provided in the form of a single-use or gender-neutral bathroom. Version 2 would leave the management of the bathroom policies to school, as has previously been the case. And that's the completion of my presentation.
Thank you. The board members will have an opportunity at this time for questions and comments. Before I go to the board, Dr. Polio, is there anything else that you want to say before we start the questions?
No, ma'am, thank you.
Okay, we'll start with questions and comments from the board members, starting with uh, Board Member Duncan, and then Board Member Craig, and then Board Member McIntosh.
Well, I want to begin with saying that when we received these policies, we had 17 pages that we had to review of changes or think changes to our policies and additions to our policies. So it was a great deal of thought put into creating version 1 in the first place. Then I know for me, I had about 16 questions I began with in these policies, and through conversation, I was able to reduce these down to 3 areas that I think need to be changed. And so I've not had a chance to really talk about these changes that I think need to be made to this in order for me to support even version 1. But let me just share those. One area I think needs to be added to is in the provision of single-use restrooms. We should say monitored single-use restrooms because it's never wise to have a locked door for students to have access to. And I think the monitoring of that would help alleviate that. A second change I'd like to make, when we have students who talk to us about abuse, we immediately are obligated to call Child Protective Services. When we have students who come to us and talk to us about mental health issues or sexual matters of some sort, I think at that point we should refer the student to our mental health professional, mental health practitioner in the building, so that then that mental health person makes the determination of who else needs to be contacted, if anyone. That becomes that mental health counselor's role. And it takes that away from the teacher. And it also prevents this confidential, confidant relationship that could develop, which I have seen those develop, and they can become predatory. So I think anything that we can do to stop that, and I think the moving of that responsibility then to the mental health practitioner is a better way to handle that. And then on the pronouns, when I think for our teachers' sake, this issue is going to be very difficult because they don't always know what the preferred pronouns are. But in that case, they don't. Preferred pronouns are not always, when teachers have to talk with parents, we're expecting them to use preferred pronouns at school among other people, but then when they have to have conversations with parents about their grades or whatever, then what happens to the preferred pronouns? Then that whole situation becomes very awkward for teachers. I think what we can require of teachers is that we address kids by their names. I think whatever their name, whatever name that student prefers to be addressed by, then that's what teachers can and should do and have done. I don't see teachers intentionally doing these things to students, but we have to remember we're governed by a law, and the law does not limit the number of times a teacher can use a non-preferred pronoun. It just doesn't limit it. So when we say repeatedly using non-preferred pronouns, I think we're on kind of shaky ground there because the law doesn't say a limit on that. So anyway, I would suggest that we consider these 3 changes. I know in order for me to support this, I would appreciate having those changes made, and otherwise it becomes difficult for me to support version 1 or version 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Board Member Craig.
Thank you. I've been speaking with Kevin Brown and Jonathan Lowe since Senate Bill 150 was passed, and the law puts everybody in the district in a very tough position. In implementing the policy, it puts them in, I think, as a difficult or more of a difficult position than many in the district. And everybody in the community needs to know about the care and the grace that they have approached this very difficult task, and hoping to extend dignity to all of our students. Once again, Superintendent, commend staff for the way that we have approached these issues. I cannot think of a time when we have been tasked by the legislature to implement policy that intentionally harms the students. And so we find ourselves in a very unique and precarious position in how to navigate this question. And if the law was settled, I'm not sure what we would do tonight, but I do not believe that the law is settled. I am an attorney. I am not this board's attorney. But my view of the world is that transgender students in JCPS are protected by Title IX, are probably protected by the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. And thus, I'm not sure that Senate Bill 150 is binding until those questions are fully and finally resolved, either by the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals or the United States Supreme Court. Title IX is very clear that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied benefits, or be subjected to discrimination under any educational program or activity. To me, that means that transgender students enjoy the benefits of Title IX in the way that other students do too. And I am not going to cast my vote or lend my vote to any policy that would harm those students, but would be also, in my opinion, violation of Title IX. We don't yet have clear guidance yet, though, from the Department of Education, Mr. Brown, as I understand it. And I wonder if you might just quickly provide an overview of what we expect to be coming from the federal government in October of 2023 and why it has taken so long for them to do that.
Thank you, Board Member Craig. As anticipated, the U.S. Department of Education will release final Title IX amended regulations in October. I've heard an exact date of October 23rd. I'm not sure if that's accurate. These have been coming for some time. So we are, and some of these, the promises by U.S. Department of Ed to various groups around the country that they will be coming out in October. As part of the rulemaking process in the federal government, proposed Title IX regulations have already been issued. So we know what the at least first draft of the regulations are. And in that first draft, or in that draft that we expect, I've seen no commentary from this Department of Education that they're going to change that draft on the definition of sex. And the definition of sex in this new, we anticipate the new regulations or the amended regulations will include gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, the definition of sex in the regulations. That would give us much greater clarity for this enforcement or nullification of Senate Bill 150 when that occurs. I do believe it will occur.
And I'm seizing on the word nullification that you just used there, Mr. Brown. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution, that regulation would trump Senate Bill 150?
It would. There is a body of case law, though, that some discrimination can be permissible under certain, and I'm not saying that this is what has been expressed in case law interpreting Title IX and other federal regulations, depending on the fact pattern and how that's analyzed. There probably will be a challenge to these regulations. There may be injunctions, but we do anticipate the regulations will have favorable language basically consistent with how this district has been operating for some time based on the standards of this community. This is one of the first districts in the state to have very broad non-discrimination language in our policies and procedures.
Thank you, sir. If we did not have Title IX, or if we did not know that development was coming, I do not know what I would do tonight, but knowing that that exists, and knowing that I believe in transgender students should enjoy the full benefits of that law, my vote tonight will be for version 2. And Chair Porter, when we're done with our commentary, I'll request that an opportunity to make that motion unless somebody wants to make it first. And if it does not pass, it would also be my fervent belief that this board should not adopt version 1 and should instead wait until we have had an opportunity to hear from the Department of Education in October as to what it intends to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Craig. Board Member McIntosh, and then Dr. Chris, and then Dr. Schul.
There's no question that this is a horrendous bill. It was mean-spirited. The malintent is very clear that it is intended to further marginalize an already vulnerable group. It shouldn't have come to a point where our local boards of education are even having to wrestle with civil rights issues. That said, not only is the bill mean, I mean, it's just mean, it's poorly written. I think the argument over or and proves that whoever did the actual drafting of the document was not proficient in their skills. There are other pieces, especially around curriculum and things like that, that I won't get in the weeds on, but it's very arbitrary, it's vague. Teachers have lots of questions about can they teach courses they've been teaching for a long time, you know, basic science and literature and art. And I'm not really sure how you teach an art class or an art history class or study literature or study history without talking about gender identity, especially women in the 20th century. I mean, that in and of itself is a gender identity, women's roles and all those kind of things. So the language is really bad. These are probably not the top law school students, correct, that wrote this. But make no mistake, the legislators who supported this, championed it, voted for it, they are watching this meeting. And they are watching meetings like it around the state. And my fear, my very deeply held fear, is that the minute we stand up and say, we are not going to follow the law, then every step we take, whether we've broken the law or not, they're going to say we're breaking the law. I would, and I understand that there are going to be feelings about this. I would rather put the onus on them to prove it. Prove that we're breaking the law by protecting children. Prove that we're breaking the law by not allowing bullying, whether it's from staff, from other people. Because if you really think that all of these problems that you've created in your mind exist around our LGBTQIA students, prove it. Because so far, I've not seen anyone prove that supporting and loving our students, every single one of them, because this is public education. No harm has come to another student, right? By protecting those who are most vulnerable. So I am trying to be very transparent and honest that version 2 scares me for what they would use it for to tear down our district. That they would come in and say, well, next session, wait till you see what kind of bills we pass that are going to strip Jefferson County Board of Education of their authority. Whether it's this group of 7, well, Board Member Marshall's not here, or whoever comes after us, whether it's usurping our superintendent's authority, whether it is making good on some of the promises that various legislators some from our county have made over the years to come after JCPS. Because what I feel like is when you have a board and a central office and a superintendent who genuinely do care about all kids, we're in a better position right now to protect all of our kids than if we open the door, let them in. It's letting the fox in the hen house. And we cannot afford to let people in Frankfort usurp Jefferson County's autonomy, and therefore ultimately cause more harm to our kids. So, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Chris?
Thanks, Chair Porter. I won't repeat everything Board Member Craig said, but my stance is basically in lockstep with his. In that, especially, I cannot vote for number one, and am inclined to vote for number two. The main reason I cannot vote for number one, and this is no failing of staff at all, they worked very, very hard to craft the best possible policies they could while attempting to keep us in line with all the provisions of SB 150, no matter how heinous they were. But the main reason I can't is that there are still clauses in it that basically erase people's identity. Especially, you know, cisgender people, think about how much you hate going to the bathroom in public. I certainly do. Now think about, you know, a child in school having to ask for special arrangements every time. It's just not something we can put into policy, I think. I mean, that part I think is honestly a human rights violation. General Counsel, Mr. Brown, can I ask you, does the fact that the draft guidelines that, unless I misheard you, we already know the content of the draft guidelines, and I think you said you've seen no indication that those guidelines are going to be changed, which certainly doesn't guarantee that they won't be. Does that give us any ability to say that those draft guidelines are, that we have the right to work within those draft guidelines since they are the most up-to-date information we have at the moment?
I think we make general reference to that, maybe in one of the versions, or Jonathan, do you know, to the proposed regs? But to answer the question, the proposed regs do not carry the force of law. They are very informative. They are persuasive, but they are not binding yet. I think there's probably a 99% chance that language, the definition of sex will be expanded in those regulations, but we will not know until we see them, and they're not binding until that time, until October, when they're finally issued.
So version 1 does not include that explicit language regarding the proposed revisions to Title IX regulations. It does talk about the need for clarification, and that the board, you know, we would look forward to clarification from the federal government, either through you know, that Title IX or through court decisions.
So I understand completely why, given the current legal factors at play, version 2 of these essentially must be against the advice of legal counsel if we did pass that. Does that, if we pass something that is against the advice of legal counsel, does that, what are the ramifications on that for potential legal action taken against the board.
There are certain things that I will say in open session, that's necessary to say. There are certain things that I'd still, as privileged communication. I think I answered some of those questions in the memo I provided to the board that's attorney-client privileged. I do not want to give away litigation strategy to other entities or members of the General Assembly. I appreciate the question. In general, there can be problems with not following legal guidance and interpretation. I will leave it at that.
Fair enough. So if what it seems like to me, if the regulations that come out hopefully on October 26th go the way that they think we will go, that they will go, would version 2 then be would we be able to stand behind that as would legal counsel be able to stand behind that, I guess, and have that not be against the advice of counsel?
It gives us much better standing to support what we put in version 2. However, there are interpretations of Title IX that talk about how far those provisions go and whether or not there are alternative provisions provided to a class of individuals that may technically be discrimination but are still permissible under Title IX. I'm not saying that's a possible interpretation that could come out in a fact pattern here. So on the first day that those regs are issued, I would feel pretty good about it. As legislation or as cases are filed in the country or injunctions, potentially asking for injunctions against the regulations, it would play out. We would get some case law in the matter, but that could take actually years to know whether or not how effective that change in that definition is going to be.
Okay, understood. But in the short term, at least until that plays out, if the regulations go the way we think they will on October 26th or thereabouts, will be covered. Version 2 would cover us fairly well.
Mostly, I would feel comfortable about version 2. The Kentucky Department of Education has also indicated in their guidance that, similar to what I'm saying here, that to be watching the Title IX regulations, that they could be providing greater clarity. So I think it would be very helpful.
Okay. So essentially, if we did pass version 2, it sounds like we would be out on a limb for about 3 months. And then ideally, I mean, I know that's a hypothetical, but the chances are that we would not be out on that limb. I would, my order of preference, I have to say, is version 2, and then take no action tonight. And because there's 2 weeks until the start of school, we could continue to work on the policies. There's 3 weeks until August 15th, which is the deadline the legislature set. And even if we didn't hit those deadlines, we could still go without a policy until October 26th or soon after that. I would just encourage my board colleagues to think long and hard about voting for any policy that at all problematizes the existence of any child. That's all I have. Thanks, Chair Porter.
Dr. Schul.
Thank you, Chair Porter. I want to begin by acknowledging the brilliant speeches given by children this evening. We should all be proud of JCPS students for those wonderful, articulate presentations. I want to, this is a very thorny issue for us, but I want to just acknowledge that I have full confidence in the professionals that are in our buildings day in and day out, that regardless of the policy, that they will do what is right ethically for every student and care for students as they have already. For they are the people who makes this district the welcoming and inclusive district that it is. I did have a question about bathrooms. Are there gender neutral bathrooms in every school?
Some of them are not, I would say, just gender neutral for students, but they are staff bathrooms that are marked as gender neutral many times in a office setting, for instance, and I believe that's what some schools would have to use.
That's what they would have to use?
Yes.
What are they using now?
I think a lot of the schools are using that option right now. I can't say what every school is using. You know, we have 155 of them, but I would say that a good number of them are using that option right now.
Okay. Thank you.
I would like to thank everyone that spoke this evening and express the fact that no matter what this board does, there are always people telling us what we don't do right. And I cannot say enough times that this board is here for children. This is public education. And for those of us that have been through discrimination, we don't want our children discriminated. We want our children treated with love and respect. And yes, we will hear from Frankfurt. It's not the first time. It's not the last time. But if we put our energy on embracing and educating our students instead of these kinds of controversies, and I will also say that I have invited the legislators from Frankfurt to come to JCPS and see our district, see our students, see our teachers, see our families. I feel that we are being looked at through some kind of lens when people have never been here to see what's going on in this district. It's about public education. It's about our students. And I was a teacher. You're not going to tell me how to treat my students. So you can't get me now because I've retired from that job. But there are parents in here, there are grandparents in here, and no one that's in education is going to mistreat a child. And they can put every word that they want on a piece of paper. Public education is about educating our students and making them know that they are important to us. So I'm not going to go through the various parts of it, but I would like to say that politics should work with public education instead of a distraction for the work that we must do for our students. That's all I have to say. So thank you for that. So I think, Dr. Polio, is there anything that you have to say before I have to put the motion out to receive a vote?
No, ma'am.
So at this time, is there a motion to receive a report regarding board policies to implement Senate Bill 150 to adopt related board policies for first reading referred to as version 1 and to receive for review related administrative procedures referred to as version 1? Is there a motion to receive a report regarding board policies to implement Senate Bill 150 as is referred to as version 1? Is there a motion?
Point of order, may I ask before anybody responds? Chair Porter,
Go ahead.
you're asking for a motion on 1, or are you asking the board any board member to simply make a motion?
I'm asking for a board member to make a motion. What I have on the piece of paper is what I just read to you, but you are a board member, so
If I may be recognized then, if that's fine.
if you may do that. I was reading what was based on what we have listened to for the last little bit, but please step before me and make your motion, sir.
I articulated earlier the 2 motions I would like to make. I hope to make a motion on version 2 first. And if 2 does not pass, I would request the chair recognize me again, if you would, to discuss the concept of tabling, which Mr. Brown and Dr. Kolb just discussed. I will make a motion that the board receive a report regarding board policies to implement Senate Bill 150, adopt related board policies for first reading, referred to as version 2, and receive for review related administrative procedures referred to as version 2. And that is my motion, Chair Porter.
There's a motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Second by Dr. Chris. Before I call for the vote, I want to turn it over to our general counsel to make sure that we're following the law and we're doing this correctly. To our general counsel, would you please comment?
Yes, there is a motion on the floor. The motion was made by Mr. Craig for version 2. Your original statement about version 1 was calling for a motion on version 1, but did not receive a motion or a second. So his motion superseded your comment, which means we're voting on version 2.
Okay, so that at this time, we're voting on version 2. Do we need to read what that is? No.
Jonathan, do you want to just use your slide and briefly go back over version 2?
So if that can come up. So version 2, as you remember, argues that Senate Bill 150 violates the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Title IX protections against discrimination and sexual harassment. It also expresses, states that misgendering students does violate the EPSB Code of Ethics and constitutes sexual harassment under Title IX. And it leaves the management of the bathroom policy to schools, as has previously been the case.
Okay, thank you. So I will ask each individual board member not to raise your hand, but as we're voting for version 2, so I would like to know if your vote is yes or no, starting with board member Sarah McIntosh.
Yes.
Dr. Schul,
No.
board member Duncan. No. Board member Craig. Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Diane Porter is going to vote no. There are 6 board members here, so we are at 3 and 3 yeses and 3 noes. So at this point, you want to explain, General Counsel, where we are?
Yes, it takes 4 votes to pass a motion, and we have 6 members here, so the motion fails.
Okay, the motion fails at this point. Board member Craig?
Until the United States Department of Education issues its final guidance on whether or not transgender students enjoy protections under Title IX, I would request that the board table this discussion, and I therefore move that the board receive a report regarding the board policies to implement Senate Bill 150, table related board policies for first reading, referred to as versions 1 and 2, and table for review related administrative procedures referred to as versions 1 and 2. My understanding is that this would hold the discussion until we hear from the federal government, as was just discussed with Mr. Brown.
So the recommendation is to hold moving forward until we hear from the federal government. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Second.
Dr. Chris?
Second the motion.
Second, okay. So I will ask for the vote.
Point of order, Madam Chair, I just want to have an obligation to inform the board that the board is under an obligation under existing law, was not Senate Bill 150, but KRS 160.340, that by August 15th of every year, policies must be in effect, putting into place any statutes that were passed in the previous session. So August 15th is not here yet. So I know if this vote to table passes, you very well may be hearing from Dr. Polio and myself on or before August 15th to take another run at getting a policy in place, as would be my legal obligation to advise the board of that requirement. So as of today, if we do table it, there's not an impending problem, but we will need to have further discussions about that October 15th date.
Okay, I just want to go over what was said, that August 15th, we're required by the state to have things in order, but we can still move forward tonight by tabling it, and if we need to come back together before August the 15th to do something, we will be required to do that. And we do not know when the federal government will speak out. That could be as late as October, but if I'm not trying to repeat your words, Board Member Craig, but what you're asking us to do at this time is to table this until, and we'll have to see what happens before August the 15th. Is that correct?
That is my motion, and I believe Dr. Kolb seconded it. And once that is clarified, I have one follow-up question for Mr. Brown.
Okay, so I just wanted to go over it so we were clear on what we were voting on. Sorry. So at this time, there is a motion by Board Member Craig, seconded by Dr. Chris. So I will start again by asking each board member how they will vote on this, starting with Board Member McIntosh.
Yes.
Dr. Schul?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan?
Yes.
Board Member Craig? Dr. Chris?
Yes.
Diane Porter? Yes, it's unanimous, so it is tabled, and there is the potential that we will come back together before August the 15th, but at this moment, it is tabled, and
Chair
that's
Porter,
where we are.
Could I introduce a resolution?
I'm sorry.
Could I introduce a resolution regarding this issue?
Go
That
ahead.
the board has received, my understanding is the board's received a copy of this, and I apologize, it's rather lengthy. Mr. Brown, should I read this in full, or should I just refer to the written document?
Yes, the tradition is that we do normally read into the record the proposed resolution.
Okay, and if it's okay with Board Member Craig, I'm going to add in a paragraph from the resolution that he requested be drafted as well. So this is a resolution regarding the physical, mental, and emotional support for all students, staff, parents, and other stakeholders of Jefferson County Public Schools, regardless of gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation. Whereas it is the right of every child, regardless of gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation, to access a free public K-12 education, and the district welcomes and supports all students. And whereas the district has a responsibility to ensure that all students who reside within its boundaries, regardless of gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation, can safely access a free public K-12 education. And whereas the district recognizes that there are employees and educators who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender, and that all employees are valued members of the school community, regardless of their gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation. And whereas the district recognizes that families in our community have diverse backgrounds, and the district values all our families, regardless of the family member's gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation. And whereas the district recognizes that creating lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, or LGBTQ inclusivity in the district is not about any single action, and it will not happen with just the passage of a resolution or the change of a policy. Rather, it is about effectuating a paradigm shift through facilitating deeper understanding of sexual and gender diversity. And this requires appropriate communication, professional development, and a commitment from the board, the district, and all schools of all grade levels to support this shift and commit to moving forward with the resolve to learn and further best practices into the future. And whereas systemic transphobia, biphobia, and homophobia push LGBTQ youth out of school, and those same systems of oppression may cause long-lasting negative mental health outcomes. And whereas LGBTQ students experience high rates of bullying, victimization, and harassment at school on the basis of their actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. And whereas this bullying, victimization, and harassment has led to negative educational outcomes for LGBTQ students, including higher rates of dropping out, higher absence rates, lower post-secondary school aspirations, and can lead to homelessness and incarceration. And whereas affirmation of gender identity and gender expression for youth of all ages is proven to be one of the most effective mental health interventions for supporting transgender youth, gender expansive youth, and gender nonconforming youth. And whereas board policies 09.42811 and 09.42811 prohibit the harassment or discrimination of students based upon sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or appearance, or sex, including sexual harassment, and whereas Louisville Metro government civil rights ordinances prohibit discrimination, including discrimination based on gender, gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation, and whereas the U.S. Department of Education has upheld the interpretation of Title IX to protect students from discrimination on the basis of their gender identity, and whereas on June 15th, 2020, the United States Supreme Court ruled in the case of Bostock versus Clayton County that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity is necessarily also discrimination because of sex as prohibited by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And whereas the language of the Federal Education Privacy Law, FERPA, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, protects students' rights to privacy about their personal information, and revealing a student's transgender status, birth name, sex assignment at birth, or medical history to classmates, parents, teachers, and others may put the school in violation of FERPA. And whereas over the past several years, the U.S. Department of Education has been engaged in the rulemaking process required under law to revise and amend the federal regulation implementing Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. And whereas the amended final rule for Title IX is expected to be published in the Federal Register in the fall of 2023 and become the law for the entire United States of America, preempting all state laws that contravene its provisions. And whereas the final rule for Title IX is expected to make explicit that the meaning of sex includes sexual orientation and gender identity for the purposes of protecting people from harassment and discrimination in an educational setting under Title IX, codifying into law the longstanding guidance of the U.S. Department of Education and the vast preponderance of rulings by federal courts across the nation. And whereas the U.S. Department of Education may sue districts that discriminate against transgender students and seek to deny them federal funding if they do not follow the Title IX requirements, and whereas the persuasive authority of a majority of opinions of federal U.S. courts of appeals and district courts suggests that many of the school-related provisions of Senate Bill 150 may violate Title IX of the Education Amendment Act of 1972, or the Equal Protection Clause of 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, or both. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Jefferson County Board of Education. The district shall provide access to resources that are specifically responsive to gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. Furthermore, the district shall allow students and staff to use requested names and pronouns without requiring a legal name change or medical diagnosis. This includes allowing students to list a chosen name other than their legal name in school records and use this name for most school purposes, while keeping a legal name the student does not use in a segregated confidential file. Furthermore, the district shall allow students to dress in a way that matches their gender identity, which includes not having to conform to stereotypical notions of masculinity and femininity. Furthermore, the district and schools shall incorporate LGBTQ people and issues in school curricula, including in health and sex education. School libraries shall include materials in school libraries that portray LGBTQ figures in a positive light. The district and schools shall ensure that the curricula include diverse perspectives, especially LGBTQ working class people and people of color, and issues specific to communities of color. Furthermore, the district will not reveal a student's transgender status, birth name, sex assigned at birth, or medical history to classmates, parents, teachers, or others, unless there is a legitimate educational reason to share it. Even if a student discloses information about their transgender status to some people in some settings, this does not authorize teachers, staff, or the district to disclose it to others. However, parents will be granted students' official school records if requested. Furthermore, the district prohibits bullying and harassment against all persons, whether student or district employee, on the basis of actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, or the actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression of their associates. Furthermore, every school within the district shall, within 90 days of the date of this resolution, take steps to create a safe climate for LGBTQ students, including designating an LGBTQ liaison and providing support for any LGBTQ student groups, including gay straight alliances or gender and sexuality alliances, GSAs, create procedures to address anti-LGBTQ bullying and harassment, which will include procedures for how students may report bullying and harassment, and require schools to track and report data on incidents of anti-LGBTQ bullying and harassment. Furthermore, the district shall, within 90 days of the date of this resolution, work with the relevant exclusive bargaining representatives to determine how LGBTQ anti-discrimination policies can best be incorporated in existing or future collective bargaining agreements. Furthermore, the district within 90 days of the date of this resolution, the district shall, within 90 days of the date of this resolution, create a plan for professional development related to anti-LGBTQ bullying and harassment so that all district employees are trained to recognize and respond to anti-LGBTQ bullying and harassment. Furthermore, the superintendent shall report back on compliance with this resolution to the board within 120 school days of the date of this resolution. Furthermore, the board declines to adopt policies to implement Senate Bill 150 until the amended final rule for Title IX, which is expected to make explicit that the meaning of sex includes sexual orientation and gender identity for the purposes of protecting people from harassment and discrimination in an educational setting under Title IX and is expected to be published in the Federal Register in the fall of 2023. Furthermore, the district has deep and abiding concern regarding the severe negative consequences of implementation of SB 150 and strongly supports efforts for impacted children and their parents or guardians to seek relief through the courts to protect their rights to equal educational opportunities in public schools and looks forward to clarification from the courts that will ensure equal educational opportunity for all students. Furthermore, the board expresses it, and this is the paragraph from Mr. Craig's turn. The board expresses its intent to review and amend board policies implementing Senate Bill 150, 2023 as soon as practicable after the publication by the U.S. Department of Education and the Federal Register of the final rule implementing Title IX of the Education Amendments Act of 1972 in order to comply with federal law and protect children from sexual harassment and discrimination in education based on their gender identity. Furthermore, the district shall distribute this resolution to district staff, students, and parents using usual means of communication, and the resolution will be translated into multiple languages spoken by students at home. And furthermore, district-affiliated contractors having contact with district students shall be notified of this resolution. I move for the adoption of the resolution that I just read.
Seconded.
Yes. Rise a vote. It has a motion and a second, I think, already, Cole and Craig.
There is a motion and a second to approve, to accept this resolution, and at this time, I will call for the vote to accept the resolution that was just read to us by Dr. Chris that will continue to embrace the students within JCPS. So, thank you, Dr. Chris, for reading that. And I will call by board member names if you are willing to accept the resolution, starting with Board Member McIntosh.
Can I make a brief comment?
But we can't hear you, so can.
Sorry, is that better? As our folks in IT can attest, the update, I've not been able to receive emails for a few days now. So I'm just getting this 5-page document. I'm going to abstain from the vote because I have not had time to read it in its entirety. That was very quick. And I have just I have concerns and questions that while I don't disagree with the spirit of the document, I have some concerns that some of these things in here fall more under policy than resolution, and so I would want to have a lot more time.
Okay, so you're abstaining
I'm
from the vote, and after, I mean, whether you ask at this meeting or after this meeting, the questions that you have, but let's go on and get the vote if that's okay. Dr. Shule?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Ms. Duncan?
Too much policy in this. No.
James Craig?
Yes.
Dr. Chris,
Yes.
Diane Porter, yes. Thank you. So that at this time completes the action item. Thank you, Jonathan Lowe, for your presentation. Thank you to our General Counsel, Kevin Brown, for giving us information that we needed to know along the way. And thank you, board members, for your comments and questions. And Board Member McIntosh, we will get your questions answered. I don't know that we're going to do it right this second, but we'll get the questions answered. Thank you to those that came to this meeting tonight to make sure that JCPS remains focused on the children and equal opportunities for those of us that had to walk that walk before some of you all were born. We want everyone to feel safe and comfortable. So thank you for being with us tonight. And we're